So we come up on the F40, and this was right at the front of the pond. Now, I've never seen an F40 in person, and a couple of things that really stood out to me here are how fragile it just seems. So we know this is the first, I believe, all carbon fiber car that was put into production. Just as you can see here, exposed rivets, exposed screw heads, it just seems sort of halfway built, almost like a concept car or a true race car, and I think that was probably the point, but it just wasn't something I was expecting of a Ferrari. And it, as we know, it's one of the last of the true analog Ferraris, and it really seems that way physically. Absolutely beautiful car, one of the best paint finishes of the show. This is my favorite car at the show, period. The Lagonda on the Ponda. This person obviously paid the most for their spot and wanted you to know it. I've always loved the Lagonda. I've always wanted to see one. I really want to see one in maroon, but this is beautiful. I wish I could have seen the interior to see if it was the touch button interior and the single spoke steering wheel, but absolutely beautiful. One of my absolute most favorite cars ever. And just look at the tires on this. We come up to this beautiful beige, sort of champagne-colored Lorenzer. It's a 500 SEL, I believe. I'll walk around to the back in a second. Lorenzer is actually a tuning firm that has been in partnership with Mercedes for a very long time. They're not in-house like AMG is now. They started in the late 30s, but they do a lot of the same things AMG does, and they tune out the engine, they tap its power reserves, they adjust the suspension, they put on their own wheels. As you can see, this car has a beautiful body kit with side skirts and front and rear lips. This is a pre-facelift W126. It has the beautiful interior. Those lamb's wool seats are not original, but in the back here we see some incredible velour. That was one of the top trims you could get for seat covers in the W126. We come around to the back. It's really, really beautiful, and actually some fun history about this. Paul McCartney had one, and it sold at auction for only about $38,000, and he's pictured with the car. And a lot of people were saying there wasn't enough with him and the car, and it wasn't on an album cover, but I would absolutely love to own one of these. I think the W126 is quite a pig in terms of handling. I do own one, so I'd love to see sort of how this one stacks up against something like that. But just with the flags, the German plates, it's a beautiful, beautiful specimen, and something I'd love to own one day, or at least drive. But also one of my favorites at the show. So we have the all-important first-gen Viper. Just the width of this thing is insane. I'm sure it wanted to kill me just walking around it, let alone driving it. I mean, you can't say enough about these that hasn't already been said. They're just insane. That gigantic cast iron V10 up front, no traction control, no driver aids of any kind. The interior was beautiful. I don't love the Viper. I appreciate it as America's sort of answer to maybe TVR or something like that. But this one was beautiful. Towards the end of the pond, didn't draw a huge crowd. I think there's just too many of them now. But again, a beautiful car. It's not maybe something I'd want to drive just because I don't have the greatest life insurance policy, but really beautiful. If you look, funny enough, in those headlights, you see that little prong sticking out. Those are the headlight levelers. You'll see one on the driver's side too. Those are a bubble level. That's how you leveled your headlights, and they left that out. I guess Chrysler or Mopar found that acceptable. Obviously, we wouldn't do that today, but you see it just sticking out there. It has little hash marks on it and a little bubble inside, and that's how you level your headlights. Very curvaceous, just beautiful. Something about this, I didn't realize they had center operating windshield wipers like a minivan. Really cool, really interesting. Not much else to say about this beautiful, beautiful car. This right here is something that everyone was talking about, this Alpina C1 2.3. I actually got to know a little bit about the story of this car. The owner brought it over from Germany, and the German owner was the first owner. So technically this is a 2-owner car, first owner in the States. I probably will never see one of these again, but absolutely beautiful. It is unrestored. That is original paint. Those are original wheels. Everything is original on this car, and it's just absolutely beautiful. This could have been one of the rarest cars, not worldwide, but in the States at the show. I've never even heard of the C1 until I was at RADwood. The interior's sort of general BMW, but we all know that it's under the hood for Alpina. Now, whether or not they bored this out, I'm not sure. I don't think they did. It probably was more of a handling and appearance package. But really, oh, there I am with my 80s coat on. That just shows you the great paint finish for being original paint. But even that spoiler on the back isn't warped or anything, and those are I believe those are rubber. But beautiful dual exhaust, Euro bumpers, just a gorgeous car. I would have loved to have met the owner of this, but I'm sure he was elsewhere, probably looking at my car. I just think it's so fun, and again, something I'd love to drive. Now, I don't love the 3 Series of this generation. They're not my favorite cars. I have an E32. I prefer the BMWs just after this. Sort of the mid to late 90s. I just think they're a little bit better looking, but you can't deny that this is really something to see, and it's really cool that it made it all the way to Austin. I'd love to know if this owner is Texas based. I'd assume they are. This car was probably trucked here. It doesn't look like it was driven. It doesn't have plates. But if he did drive it, he's braver than me, because I would never want to drive this. I'd just stick it in my living room. Well, we have the classic and the infamous DeLorean. We all know the story. John DeLorean, a bunch of fraud, a bunch of bad business mistakes, a terrible engine, and a beautiful car. We all know this should have been a V8. We all know this should have been a success, but it wasn't. Now, you're about to see that stainless steel body is absolutely no joke. It looks like a modern refrigerator. It is so interesting to see in person, and under the Texan sun, it just reflects beautifully. I'd love to see an LS swapped version of these. I'm sure it's been done. I think that would be something that would make me want to own one if I could find a resto modded situation, but still a beautiful car. I mean, there's enough to be said all over the internet about these. I think it was really cool. It's the first time I had seen one, but it's a bittersweet because you know it's not a good car. You know this is not something you'd want to own as is unless you were just a fanatic about DMC. But otherwise, really cool, and the epitome of 80s. Look at those tail lights. They couldn't get enough squares in them. You see that little tiny triangle of orange right on the edge. They just had to get a right angle where they could. And really cool car, really fun to see, and just sort of needed at any 80s car show. We move on to a Subi owner's wet dream, the SVX. Now, this is not the SVXL. The SVXL had that rear wheel steering. Say that 5 times fast. But interesting note about these had a 3.3 liter Boxer engine, and it would be the largest engine Subaru produced until the Tribeca, which had the 3.6, and then I believe that trickled down into their other vehicles. But we see here 25 mpg highway. That's pretty good for a 6-cylinder from the 90s. Of course, he has his Matchbox there, but really beautiful color. Really interesting car to look at with the McLaren F1 type windows. Now, I know McLaren did it because they would blow out. I believe on this, they did it because the windows were so big, they couldn't roll down into the doors. So, still a really cool design. One thing someone said to me that I now see is it's a 3000 GT mixed with a New Edge Mustang. If you look at it from the front and you get that sort of rear 3/4 view, it's like a mashup of those two cars. Now, straight from the back, it doesn't look like that, but still really cool car. These had a really sophisticated all-wheel drive system. They could handle torque front and rear, 50% rear, 50% front. Really interesting. Not a car I would own, not a car I love, but again, your classic 90s tech is all the rage, and plenty of gray plastic. So now you're going to be wondering, why are we looking at an Eldorado Baritz? And I chose to film this car out of all the others that were there because it was sort of off to the side on the concrete. It was in a premium spot, but this looked like it was something that was pulled out of the showroom the day it was manufactured. I mean, this car, there wasn't a paint chip, there wasn't oxidation, there was nothing. And I don't know if it was restored or it's kept that way. I didn't get any answers on that, but you know, people talk about how to tell if something's going to be collectible, how to tell if something's not going to appreciate in value. And an older gentleman told me one time, he said, things that become collectible, generally the most collectible are things that were never meant to be collected or never meant to be saved. And this was never meant to be collected or saved or treated as well as it probably has been. And I'm a sucker for American cars of this vintage, you know, that mid to late 80s. This car competed directly with the Lincoln Continental at the time, and if you compare the two, this is still, you know, pulling from a lot of 70s design, even 60s designs, flat dash, tufted seats, awful fake wood, but you know it is probably the most comfortable car to take a road trip in at RADwood. And it screams Americana in such an awful way that it's endearing. You know it's probably not a very good car, but it has a huge trunk, it has super soft seats, and it's probably super quiet inside. Is it slow? Sure. Is it bad on gas? I don't actually know, but it's taking everything people loved about the 60s, about the 50s, about the 70s, about American cars, and fitting it into a package that people could reasonably purchase and live with in the 80s and 90s. And it's bittersweet, but just an absolute fabulous car, and so cool to see that someone brought this to RADwood and was proud of it, and I'm proud for them. So now we have an absolute gorgeous F355 Berlinetta in a nearly blue purple, I would say. So this car preceded the F360, and it was this platform that the F1 transmission first appeared on in 1997. This one has the gated manual, thank the Lord, but 1,500 or so of this Berlinetta were produced with the F1 transmission, and it was the first time, and I'm sure it was a novelty. I'm sure there's a Top Gear episode of them doing it, but as we all know, those early F1 transmissions were absolute garbo. This one with the gated manual no doubt is worth a bit more. I don't know the year, but they produced the 355 from 94 to 99, and then the 360 came out. Although I would say that this is the more desirable car. You have the pop-up headlights, you have hints of the 80s, you have hints of the 90s, gorgeous interior, and I just don't like the look of the 360 in comparison to this. You have a little bit of the flying buttress in the back here, but gorgeous car. Love this color. So interesting to see a Ferrari in this color and not in red. And we move on to what won the most mint in show, is this Porsche 924 Turbo. It had, I believe, just under 4,000 original miles on it. The gentleman who owned this, his father had bought it new and didn't drive it much, and then he sold it, but the son bought it back from the second owner. I don't love these. The 924 I know is a decent car, and if you want to get into Porsche, this is the one to buy because you can find them all day long. Now the turbos you can't find all day long, so that does make this a little special. I will say the color is right out of Volvo's paint box. It is absolutely horrible. This color is so sad that this poor car was painted in this color and sold like this, and it's still so mint. It's being forced to stay alive, but nonetheless, it's a beautiful little machine, beautiful leather interior. It's a manual. I'm sure it's great fun to drive, just not something that excites me. I would much rather have seen a similar condition 928, but it's a pretty car, and I'm glad the guy won. It's got a really cool story. So, Radiston Show goes to this homologation special Ford RS 2000. Now, there were only 200 of these produced worldwide. That was mandated by the Group B Rally, rules. So, interesting fact about these were produced right at the end of Group B rallying. The Ford RS 2000 was actually underpowered for its class and didn't do particularly well, but there were several crashes involved with this car, and this was one of the cars that abolished, or was the reason for the abolishment of the Group B rally circuit. We see back here the twin coil suspension. It's double wishbone twin coil front and rear, full-time four-wheel drive, and these got 0 to 60 in, I believe, between 4.3 and 4.8 seconds. So, pretty fast, regardless, the road-going version. Now, on the circuit, they were up to 450 horsepower, but they were still relatively heavy cars, and Group B didn't have any regulations, so that's sort of the product Ford was left with. And this one, Radiston Show, just because it's a beautiful example, and worldwide there's only 200, so I do believe this was the rarest car at the show. Really cool thing to see that it's still running and it's still on the road. Sad story that this was sort of the last breath of Group B Rally, but still cool to see. And Ford actually planned an evolution model of the RS 2000, which was obviously going to be more powerful, more aggressive. That never happened, though. I think 20 of these RS 2000s were converted by their owners, but still really cool to see, and glad this owner got the award. Well deserved. So here we have a member of one of the most interesting topics, in my opinion, of the American car industry, and that is the race truck wars of the 80s and 90s, or at least early 90s. We have this GMC Cyclone, really cool car. This owner won Raddest Mod, and it all has to do with the fact that he has this incredible massive radiator in the back, the fuel tank, crazy bucket seats. You'll see the engine. This, I don't know the power this is putting out or the specific specs, but I do know that a lot was put into this truck. A lot of really cool performance mods in a really neat 80s GM truck package. I love these 80s and 90s GM trucks, the square bodies. They're not the true square bodies, but I grew up with the 93 Sierra, and I just have an affinity for these. Now we see the engine, enormous turbo. Couldn't tell you the PSI that's putting out, but absolutely massive. Look at that downpipe. That's got to be 6, 7, or 8 inches. And then there's the engine. Really cool truck. Cool to see that this guy put so much work into it. And Raddest Mod, I think that's fair. One of the most customized vehicles at the show. Would love to see this go up against a tuned Ford Lightning, even though the Lightning is a full-size truck and this is a mid-size or small truck. Still really cool. To paint that deep black, just awesome. I love that GM interior. Slabs of plastic, slabs of gray, but overall really cool, and good for him for winning Raddest Mod.